know far less about Elijah than such people as Abraham, Moses, David, and Daniel. Elijah didn't write any part of the Old Testament. God used him during a spiritually dark time in Israel and Judah to bring revival to the nation. Elijah's ministry was key to bringing a permanent end to Baal worship in Israel. And despite Elijah's limited ministry time frame and exposure, he has a far-reaching impact that carries into the New Testament. He had a uniquely powerful ministry in the Old Testament that wasn't long in length, but what stands out from his ministry among many of the powerful ministry of the Old Testament is that Elijah did not die. When you look at all the other characters that I mentioned, when you look at the Noahs and the Abrahams and Moses and the prophets who did write books and Daniel and David and all these characters, they all died. Elijah did not die. Only two people in the Bible didn't experience death, Enoch and Elijah. We know that Elijah was taken up in a whirlwind, and despite a multi-day search for the body, he was never found. The reality was that Elijah did not experience death. It leads the Old Testament to points to the fact that Elijah will have a future ministry. And we see this in the New Testament. John the Baptist comes in ministry, and his ministry is the ministry of Elijah, who will precede the Messiah. The Pharisees come to John the Baptist and ask him specifically if he was three different people. They start with, "Are you the Messiah?" They're asking John the Baptist, "Are you the Messiah?" No. "Are you Elijah?" No. "Are you the prophet?" No. That's how Elijah answers each one of those questions. And if this is what first century Jews were expecting, John the Baptist could not have been Elijah. He was not the original prophet Elijah reappearing on earth. He was a different human being altogether, born through the reproduction to Zechariah and Elizabeth. In the sense that he was that way, he was correct when he said, "No, I am not Elijah." Now, the reason the Pharisees ask John the Baptist if he's Elijah is because of the prophecy that comes from Malachi. Malachi chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. "See, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the hearts of the children to their parents, or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction." So the Pharisees understand the prophecy of Malachi, and they say Elijah is the prerequisite to the Messiah coming. They point to a future ministry. They're saying Elijah ministered in the Old Testament, but Malachi said he's going to come again and minister before the Messiah comes. So, John the Baptist, are you the Elijah? Are you a him? No, I'm not, because they know he is the prerequisite. When Gabriel shows up to tell Zechariah that his wife will give birth to a son, he says, this is what Gabriel says in Luke chapter 1, verse 17, "He will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah." Gabriel doesn't say that John the Baptist is Elijah, but that he will minister in the power of Elijah. Not only did John the Baptist minister in the power of Elijah, he also wore the same rustic clothing of camel's hair and a leather belt. Fashion statement, right? Yeah. Elijah did it. John the Baptist, I'm going to wear the same type of clothing. Both Elijah and John the Baptist had strong calls to Israel to repent of their sins. Right? Elijah said it. John the Baptist said it. Both also boldly confronted the corruption of the rulers of God's people at great risk to themselves. Elijah confronted Ahab because he murdered Naboth to steal his vineyard. John the Baptist confronted Herod Antipas because of his illicit relationship with his brother's wife, taking on authority. Both faced death threats from the ruling queens. Elijah was threatened by Jezebel. She was not able to fulfill it. Herodias called for John the Baptist's execution, and he did lose his life because of that. The disciples, because of the culture they grew up in and the teaching they had received, are also looking for Elijah to come before the Messiah. And as they've traveled with Jesus, and as they listen to Jesus, and as they see Jesus minister, they're coming to the conclusion, this is the Messiah, right? They're starting to believe that. Peter makes the word, says, who do people say I am? They go through all these people, and Peter says, you're the Messiah. But they have this understanding, well, if you're the Messiah, when did Elijah come? He's like, we're wondering, is he still going to come or did he come? So in Matthew chapter 17, verses 10 through 13, the disciples asked Jesus, they asked him, why then do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first? Jesus replied, to be sure, Elijah comes and will restore all things. But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood he was talking to them about John the Baptist. But when you read this, I interpret this verse to say that John the Baptist is a type of Elijah. He ministered in the power and the spirit of Elijah and even dressed like Elijah, but he's not the same historic person as Elijah as prophesied by Malachi. I would add that Jesus' statement is also prophetic in nature, speaking about a future appearance of the historic Elijah. He says that Elijah comes and will restore all things. That's future tense. I believe that Jesus was saying, hey, John the Baptist was a type of Elijah, but he will come again. Jesus, there is the language there about a future appearance of Elijah that seems to me to reconcile to Revelation chapter 11. Revelation chapter 11, verses 3 through 6. And I will appoint my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. They are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands, and they stand before the Lord of the earth. If anyone tries to harm them, fire comes from their mouths, and they devours their enemies. This is how anyone who wants to harm them must die. They have power to shut up the heavens so that it will not rain during the time they are prophesying, and they have power to return the waters into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they want. Think about this. 1,260 days equals 3.5 years. If you're familiar with Elijah, you know that when he prayed in the Old Testament, it didn't rain for 3.5 years. They are dressed here in sackcloth. Again, the images match the images used by the prophet Zechariah. In Zechariah, the 2 olive trees are there, and now you have sackcloth, which was the wardrobe of prophets. Doctors wear lab coats, chefs wear tall white hats, soldiers wear camo, prophets wear sackcloth. The 2 witnesses in Revelation 11 are Moses and Elijah. We know this because we see the actions from this chapter tied to their activities from the Old Testament. Both Moses and Elijah have accounts where their enemies are consumed with fire. When the followers of Korah rebelled against Moses, the ground opened up and take them in, and their followers and fire destroyed 250 were offering incense. When Ahaziah sent men to get Elijah in 2 Kings chapter 1, he called down fire on the first 2 groups of 50 men who came to retrieve him. They have power to shut the skies so there's no rain. That's the power that Elijah exercised. The power to turn water into blood and strike the earth with plagues is the power that Moses exercised. Then you have the death of these 2 witnesses. The beast from the abyss kills these 2 prophets in the ultimate act of desecration and does not allow their bodies to be buried. The prophet who did not experience death in 2 Kings experiences death in Revelation chapter 11. So when Jesus said, to be sure, Elijah comes and will restore all things, I believe he was also speaking of a future time when Elijah will return prior to the second coming of Jesus. Then you have this a time when the required appearance of Elijah prior to the Messiah's coming seems to be what led people to misinterpret some of Jesus' words on the cross. Matthew chapter 27, verse 46. Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? And the people who heard him cry out those words misunderstood. And they thought he was calling out for Elijah, because the words, my God, are a translation of the word Eli from the Aramaic. Why did they misinterpret what Jesus was saying? Because many of them thought and believed that Jesus was the Messiah. And they also knew that many who followed Jesus thought he was the Messiah. So when he's calling out, he seems to be calling out for Elijah, the one who will precede the Messiah. Elijah's going to show up now. As we travel through this series on the life of Elijah, you come away impressed with the power of the Spirit in his ministry. In this introductory message, we haven't even looked at his ministry, but he did not die. And the scriptures point to some future ministry that will continue in the same power that he started. You have background on Elijah, and we need to understand why I start here is because I want us to understand where was the power that Elijah had in his ministry. When we get to 1 Kings 17 and we travel to 2 Kings chapter 2, we're like, wow. Like I said, we don't know his background. We don't know his family. Where did this power come from? James chapter 5, verses 16 through 18. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. Elijah was a human being, even as we are. He prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3.5 years. Again he prayed, and the heavens gave rain, and the earth produced its crops. I read this and I'm thinking, James, you misunderstood Elijah's ministry. Why are you picking Elijah? I mean, of all the people in the Old Testament, I'm thinking, he does not measure, like I do not think I would compare myself to Elijah, right? I'm like, and he starts by saying that Elijah is a human being even as we are. I mean, if all you knew about Elijah's life are the things we already covered tonight, you would think he most definitely is not like me. I don't speak like him. I don't dress like him, right? I do not have the power of God in my life the way he does. Why in the world, James, are you comparing us to him and saying we are like him? Because the first thing I'm thinking is, there's no way I'm anything like this man. The activities he undertook were far more powerful than you or I have ever done anything in the Holy Spirit. I mean, he prayed for it not to rain, and it did not rain. 3.5 years he had control over the weather. The Wall Street Journal had an article this week describing a couple of governments and some scientists that are taking different approaches to cool the planet. Yeah. One is dumping chemicals in the ocean. They're going to do this summer off of Martha's Vineyard in the Northeast, hoping that chemical will absorb carbon dioxide and therefore help to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide and help to cool the planet. There's another group that is going to spray salt water into the clouds. I'm not making this up. This is not like, me just thinking off this is stuff. It was in the Wall Street Journal. They're going to spray salt water into the air around off the coast of Australia because the heating of the planet or the climate change is causing the waters to get warmer, which is killing the coral reef, and they're concerned about the Great Barrier Reef. So they want to spray salt water into the air, hoping that it'll create more clouds, which will then help to cool the planet. then the final one is they're going to inject reflective particles into the sky to help reflect the rays. And again, hoping, they're not hoping that this alone will do it, but they're like testing these approaches that maybe we can cool down the planet some more. You'll notice no one from Minnesota is involved with these things. But the scientists and the agencies and the governments involved in this simply didn't realize they just have to ask Christians to pray, right? I mean, Elijah prayed, and for 3.5 years, it did not rain. He had control of the local weather there because he had gone to God and asked God and said, stop the rain. And for 3.5 years, it didn't rain. And then we'll see this passage. He gets to the end of that time, and he prays that it's going to rain. And it's sunny out. I mean, it's as blue as sky as you can get. And nothing happens. And he sends a servant to go look. Prays again, nothing. Prays again, nothing. Prays again, nothing. Prays again, nothing. Prays 7 times. Finally, all he sees is a small cloud on the horizon. He's like, it's done. The storm's coming. And sure enough, rain came. James says that we are just like him. And the point that James is trying to make is to block the objection that says Elijah was somehow extraordinary and cannot serve as a model for our praying. He is saying that's not true. He's like, as different as Elijah looks, as far away in time as Elijah is from us, as different as he dresses, as different as everything about him, he's like, he is still flesh and blood. And you can exercise the same power in your prayers that he had. James is saying that Elijah was not extraordinary and that your prayers can have a great effect. He's saying your prayers can have an effect similar to changing weather patterns so no rain falls for 3.5 years. Think about that. There is power when you go to God and say, God, please do this. God hears and acts. And James wants you to understand, like in James chapter 5, this is all about like God doing healing in people's lives, God doing the miraculous. He wants you to understand that. And James says that the power is not in the prayer, is in the prayer, not in the person. Think about that. See, you start to pray and you think, my prayer, me, I want to have the power in my prayer. And James is saying the power is not in you, the power is in your prayer. When your prayer comes out of you, that's where the power resides. It's not in, like we always go, oh, I don't have the power, like my prayer is not powerful. Yeah, no, your prayer is powerful, regardless of who you are, because it doesn't matter who you are. Your power of the prayer is in the prayer, not in you. And the power is in the person listening to the prayer, not in the person making the prayer. So you can take you out of the equation. Your prayer is powerful, and the person listening to your prayer is powerful. That is what James is trying to tell us. James is working diligently to stop people from being discouraged to the point of not praying. He wants you to believe that your prayers can match the greatest prayers prayed in the Bible. Think about that. Your prayers matching the prayers that stopped the weather in 1 Kings. That's how powerful your prayers are. And the enemy doesn't want you to believe that. But God wants you to believe that. And when we look at the power of Elijah's ministry, that's the key. That's why we start at the end. Because when we look at it and we're like, whoa, this is incredible. James says, you know what? It was what he asked God of. And you'll see him pray. Stand with me as we close. Lord, even as we finish this service tonight, we exercise the faith that we read about in James chapter 5. I come to you as I close this service with a prayer. And you said that my prayer is heard by God, and that I stand in a similar place to Elijah. And it's not me that makes my prayer powerful, but the listening God that makes it powerful. And as I close tonight, Lord God, my ask is that you would raise our prayers and our faith to match what we read about in James chapter 5. To believe that we can come before you and bring those things to you and you hear. Lord, I pray tonight for those who are discouraged because they have had prayers not answered. I pray that you raise their faith, Lord. I pray for those who have prayed things and are saying, God, you haven't answered. I pray, Lord God, that you would begin to see those things answered. They would begin to see those things come about. And Lord, I pray tonight that our prayer lives would be changed as we understand the power of this passage and the power of Elijah's prayers, not in the person of Elijah, but in the prayers he prayed. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.